We always think of betrayal as a sudden explosion, a violent shattering of everything we held dear. But for me, it was more like the slow, rhythmic ticking of a clock in an empty room, a sound you don't even notice until the silence around it becomes unbearable. I didn't lose my marriage in a single night. I lost it in 1,000 tiny moments where I chose to look away. And by the time I finally forced myself to see, the person looking back at me was a stranger wearing my wife's face. This is the story of Elias Thorne and his wife Elena Thorne. Their marriage was built on the kind of sturdy, architectural stability that most people mistake for invulnerability. Elias, a man of quiet calculations and a career spent in the high-stakes world of corporate restructuring, believed that if the foundation was solid, the house would stand forever. Elena, a woman of soft edges and hidden depths, moved through their life with a grace that masked a growing hollow hunger for something Elias couldn't name. Their tension wasn't loud. It was the hum of a wire stretched too tight, a thematic exploration of how emotional neglect can turn a sanctuary into a cage. It is a study of pride, the ego of a provider, and the devastating silence that follows when the music of a relationship finally stops. The drive home from the city was always my favorite part of the day. It was the transition. The slow decompression from the jagged edges of boardrooms and the cold logic of balance sheets to the soft, predictable warmth of Oak Ridge. I liked the way the gravel sounded under my tires, welcoming, crunching rhythm that signaled I was back where I belonged. For 12 years, that sound meant peace. Elena and I didn't have the kind of marriage people wrote poems about. We had something better, or so I thought. We had a partnership. I provided the security, the sprawling Victorian house on the hill, and the lifestyle that allowed her to pursue her painting without the grime of commercial necessity. In return, she provided the soul of the home. She was the one who knew which wine paired with my mood and which silences were meant to be shared rather than filled. "You're late," she would say, not as a complaint, but as an observation, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder as I walked through the door. "The Miller merger," I'd reply. "It's a tangled mess. It always is," she'd smile, and that would be that. But looking back, the hairline cracks were already there, webbed across the surface of our life, like flaws in fine porcelain. It was in the way she started leaving her studio door closed during the day. It was the way she began to talk about a man named Julian Vance, a gallery owner she'd met through a mutual friend, Marcus. Julian was vibrant, she said. He understood the kinetic energy of color. I nodded and poured my scotch, glad she had a hobby that kept her engaged while I spent my nights dissecting the failures of other men's companies. I didn't see the danger in Marcus, either. Marcus was an old colleague, a man who dealt in security and logistics, a polite way of saying he moved in circles that required a certain level of intimidation. He was a frequent guest at our dinner parties, always complimentary of Elena, always a bit too observant of the layout of our home. He was the secondary character in our play, the one who stands in the wings, waiting for the lead to misalign. One Tuesday, I came home early. A rare migraine had driven me from my office. The house was quiet, the air thick with the scent of linseed oil and something else, something sharp and unfamiliar. I walked toward the studio, expecting to find Elena at her easel. The door was ajar. She wasn't painting. She was standing by the window, her phone pressed to her ear, her back to me. Her posture was different, not the relaxed, graceful curve I knew, but something rigid, something defensive. "I can't just leave," she whispered into the receiver. "He's a good man, Julian. He's a good man, but he's not here. Even when he's sitting across from me, he's not really here." I backed away silently, my heart hammering a dull, rhythmic ache against my ribs. It wasn't a confession of an affair, not yet. It was something worse. It was the realization that in the architecture of our marriage, I had built the walls so high that I'd accidentally locked myself out. I went to the kitchen, took an aspirin, and waited for her to come down and tell me she was glad I was home. When she did, her smile didn't reach her eyes. And for the first time in 12 years, the gravel under my tires the next morning didn't sound like home. It sounded like a warning. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in the art of pretending. We moved through the house like two ghosts haunting the same hallway, occasionally brushing past each other but never truly colliding. I began to watch her, not with the eyes of a husband, but with the eyes of a man conducting an audit. I noticed the way she checked her phone when she thought I was engrossed in the news. I noticed the new Cadillac, a dark, obsidian slick Escalade that seemed to be parked at the end of our private road more often than not. I told myself it was Julian Vance. I told myself she was having a tawdry cliché affair with an art dealer because I hadn't been present enough. It was a comfortable lie because it had a solution. I could be more present. I could buy her flowers. I could take her to Tuscany. But deep down, the logic didn't hold. Elena wasn't a woman of whims. She was a woman of depths. One evening, over a dinner of grilled salmon and chilled white wine, the silence became a physical weight. "Elena," I said, my voice steady, professional, "are you happy?" She paused, her fork hovering inches from her lips. She didn't look at me. She looked at the candle flame between us. Happy is a heavy word, Elias. It implies a finished state. I think I'm evolving. Is Julian part of that evolution? She finally looked at me then. There was no guilt in her eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. Julian sees the things I paint, Elias. You only see the frames you paid for. The bruise of that sentence stayed with me for days. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't even about romance. It was about the ego. I had treated her like a prized asset in a portfolio, a beautiful constant that required maintenance but no real engagement. I realized then that I didn't truly know the woman sitting across from me. I knew the role she played. The shift in my perspective was visceral. I stopped trying to fix the marriage and started observing the reality of it. I noticed that Marcus, my friend, was calling her more than he was calling me. I noticed that the security he dealt in seemed to be bleeding into our life. I came home one night to find the obsidian Cadillac in my actual driveway, not the road my driveway. It blocked the gate like a black monolith. My pulse quickened, a cold, calculated fire starting in my gut. This wasn't Julian Vance. An art dealer doesn't drive a vehicle that looks like it belongs to a tactical unit. I sat in my car, the headlights illuminating the interior of the Cadillac. I saw the back of a woman's head, Elena's blonde hair, unmistakable. Beside her, the silhouette of a man. They weren't kissing, they were talking. It looked like a negotiation. As I reached for my door handle, the Cadillac's doors flew open. Two men stepped out. They weren't wearing suits. They were wearing heavy jackets, their posture aggressive, their eyes scanning the perimeter with a practiced, predatory ease. These weren't thugs from a movie. They were professionals. They stepped into the path of my car, blocking me from my own home. I looked at Elena through the glass. She turned her head and looked directly at me. She didn't look scared. She didn't look ashamed. She looked detached, as if she were watching a stranger arrive at a house she no longer lived in. In that moment, the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't an affair. This was a takeover, and I was the only part of the company that was no longer required. I didn't get out of the car. I stayed behind the wheel, the engine idling, a low growl in the quiet night. One of the men, a thick-necked individual with a scar running through his eyebrow, tapped on my window with a ringed finger. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. I rolled the window down just an inch. "You're blocking my gate," I said. My voice was surprisingly calm. In my world, when a deal goes south, you don't scream. You look for the exit clause. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, his voice a low rumble, "we're just making sure the lady gets her things. It'd be better for everyone if you just took a drive. Clear your head." I looked past him to the Cadillac. Elena was stepping out now. She was followed by Marcus. Not Julian the art dealer. Marcus. My colleague, my friend. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Marcus didn't just deal in security, he dealt in leverage. And Elena, in her hunger to be seen, had given him the ultimate leverage, the keys to my life, my finances, and my reputation. She wasn't being coerced. She was the one who had opened the door. Elena, I called out. She walked toward my car, stopping a few feet away. Marcus stayed back, a smug, proprietary shadow by the Cadillac. Elias, she said. Her voice was thin like paper. I didn't want it to be like this. But you never would have let me go. You would have tied me up in courts for years, treating me like another merger to be managed. So you brought Muscle to my home, I asked. You brought Marcus? Marcus understands the value of things, she replied. And for the first time, I saw a flash of the woman I'd married, the pragmatist. He helped me see that I don't have to be a footnote in your life. I can be the main character in my own. By stealing mine? I'm not stealing anything that isn't half mine, she said, though we both knew the legalities were far more complex. The accounts are being frozen, Elias. The house, well, Marcus says the deed has some interesting loopholes regarding the holding company. She wasn't justifying it with love. She was justifying it with survival. She had convinced herself that I was the villain for being stable, for being absent, and that this betrayal was her liberation. It was a psychological feat of strength. She had turned her guilt into a weapon. I looked at Marcus. He gave me a small, mocking nod. He thought he knew me. He thought I was the soft corporate executive who would fold when faced with physical intimidation and legal maneuvering. He saw a man who worked with pens, while he worked with fists and shadows. I see, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't even tell her I loved her. That would have been a waste of breath. You've made your decision, Elena. You think you found someone who sees you. I hope you like the view from where he's standing. I put the car in reverse. Where are you going? She called out, a note of genuine confusion in her voice. She had expected a scene. She had expected me to fight, to break down, to give them the satisfaction of my collapse. To a hotel, I said, and then to work. I backed down the driveway, the headlights of my car sweeping over the three of them, the wife who had traded me for a feeling, the friend who had traded me for a profit, and the thugs who were just doing their jobs. I drove away into the dark, my mind already moving past the pain and into the cold, calculated geometry of what came next. They thought they had taken everything. They forgot that I was the one who taught them how to value it. 6 months later, the world looked very different. I was living in a minimalist apartment in the city, a space of glass and steel that felt more like a cockpit than a home. I didn't miss the Victorian house. I didn't miss the Gretorian house. I didn't miss the gravel. What I missed was the illusion of the life I had. But illusions are expensive to maintain, and I was finally debt-free. Elena, meanwhile, was finding out that being the main character comes with a high production cost. The news reached me in fragments. Marcus hadn't just moved into the house. He had turned it into a base of operations. The security he provided turned out to be a front for more precarious ventures. The neighbors had complained. The police had been called multiple times for disturbances. I watched from the sidelines, a silent auditor of her decline. I didn't use the law to crush them, at least, not directly. I used the one thing Marcus didn't understand: patience. I knew the loopholes in the holding company better than he did because I had written them. I waited until the accounts he thought he had seized began to bleed. I triggered audits on the very firms he used to launder his legitimacy. I didn't have to hit him, I just had to stop the blood flow. I heard through the grapevine that Julian Vance, the art dealer, had vanished as soon as the first subpoena arrived. He was a man of kinetic energy after all. He didn't like to stay in one place when the lights got too bright. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting in a cafe when I saw her. Elena. She was walking down the street, huddled into a coat that looked too thin for the season. She looked older. The grace was gone, replaced by a frantic, jacket energy. She stopped in front of a gallery window, staring at a painting for a long time. She didn't look like an artist. She looked like someone trying to remember a language she used to speak. I could have walked out. I could have offered her a hand, or a check, or a told you so. But I stayed behind the glass. I watched her pull her collar up and disappear into the crowd. The turning point came a week later, a phone call in the middle of the night. Elias, her voice was trembling. There was no paper-thin defiance left. It was just raw, cold fear. Elena, I said, my voice devoid of malice. It's 3 a.m. He's gone, Elias. Marcus. He took everything that was left. The house is being foreclosed. There are men I don't know, looking for him. They think I know where the money is. Do you? There is no money. He spent it all trying to fight your lawyers. He's a monster, Elias. I didn't know. I thought he was strong. I thought he was protecting me. He wasn't protecting you, Elena. He was occupying you. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing shallow, ragged gasps. Can I come over? She whispered. Just for a night. I have nowhere else to go. I'm so scared. This was the moment of karma the world loves, the moment where the betrayed husband gets to watch the betrayer crawl. But sitting there in my quiet steel apartment, I felt no triumph. I only felt a profound sense of exhaustion. The ego that had driven me to win was gone, replaced by a clear-eyed understanding of the tragedy we had both authored. No, I said. The word was soft but final. Elias, please. If you come here, Elena, we'll just start the cycle again. You'll be the victim, and I'll be the provider, and neither of us will ever be real. You wanted to be seen. You need to see yourself now. Truly see yourself without a man to frame the picture. I hung up the phone. I didn't block her number. I didn't have to. I knew that the woman who had stood in my driveway with 2 thugs was gone, but the woman I had married was gone long before that. I sat in the dark, watching the city lights, realizing that justice isn't a hammer. It's a mirror. The final meeting happened a year after the night at the gate. It wasn't in a courtroom or a dark alleyway. It was in a park, a neutral, sun-drenched space where the stakes felt low and the air felt clean. Elena was sitting on a bench, a sketchbook in her lap. She looked healthy, not the polished, expensive health of our marriage, but something more grounded. She was working a job at a community college, teaching basic drawing. She lived in a small apartment that she paid for herself. I sat down next to her. We didn't hug. We didn't even shake hands. I finished it, she said, nodding toward her sketchbook. I looked at the page. It was a sketch of our old house, but it wasn't the Victorian sprawl. It was a study of the gate, the iron bars, the shadows they cast on the gravel. It's good, I said. The perspective is right. I spent so long blaming you for the walls, Elias, she said, her voice steady. I forgot that I was the one who kept the gate locked. I thought Marcus was the key. I didn't realize he was just a different kind of lock. We both were, I said. I built a life for you that didn't include you. I thought providing was the same as loving. I was proud of the structure, but I never bothered to live in it. There was no anger between us. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only the cool ash of understanding. We sat in silence for a long time, watching a young couple walk by, their hands intertwined, their faces bright with the dangerous, beautiful optimism of the beginning. Do you hate me? She asked. No, I said, and I meant it. I don't have the energy for hate. It's too heavy a thing to carry into the rest of my life. I thought I was being strong, she mused, looking at the sketch. That night with the Cadillac, I felt so powerful. I thought I was finally taking control. I didn't realize I was just being used by a smaller man to hurt a better one. I wasn't a better man then, I corrected her. I was just a richer one. I'm a better man now, I think, because I'm not trying to own anything anymore. She closed her sketchbook. I'm moving to Chicago, a fresh start. No galleries, no kinetic energy. Just a job and a small room with good light. I think you'll like the light there, I said. I stood up to leave. She looked up at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the woman I had loved, the soul of the home I thought I had built. But the moment passed. We were two different people now, shaped by the wreckage we had made of each other. Goodbye, Elias. Goodbye, Elena. I walked away, and this time I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The story of Elias and Elena Thorne was over. It didn't end with a bang or a clever twist or a moment of cinematic revenge. It ended in the quiet, reflective space where two people finally stopped lying to themselves. As I walked through the park, the sound of my footsteps on the pavement felt different. It wasn't the rhythmic crunch of gravel signaling a return to a fortress. It was just the sound of a man walking forward into a world that was no longer blocked by a black Cadillac, into a life that was finally, devastatingly, his own.